I used to think luxury resort hotels were the safest places to stay on a trip, whether for vacation or, like this one, a work conference. They probably are, but I've since learned that nowhere is completely safe. I was on a trip for a mandatory work conference at a luxury resort in Aspen, Colorado. Most attendees were staying in individual rooms at the hotel. Maybe a third of the hotel was booked for the event. The resort had its own restaurants and conference facilities. It was usually packed with tourists, but the heavy snowfall had made travel difficult, leading to cancellations and fewer visitors than usual. Most of our group had managed to get there, but the hotel felt quieter than expected. On the morning of the first day, I left my house in the early hours for a treacherous 5-hour drive through steady snowfall. In the last stretch of the drive, I stopped at a gas station. Not long after, I noticed a set of headlights behind me, staying in my mirror for a while before disappearing as I reached the hotel. I didn't think much of it at the time. By the time I checked into my room, I was completely exhausted. I took a break and freshened up before heading out to find the conference area. There were only a few scattered guests in the lobby, but one guy standing near the front desk stuck out like a sore thumb. He was younger and dressed like hotel staff, but there was something off about his uniform, and he wasn't wearing a name tag. His eyes were vacantly fixed on the distance. That was until I made the mistake of locking eyes with him. Then his expression instantly turned intense, like an unhinged person, when you can tell something is off in their head. I felt my stomach drop, so I looked away and pretended not to notice him watching me the whole time I was in the lobby. Over the course of the day, with everything going on, I completely forgot about him. I left my room around 10 in the morning and spent the entire day in the conference center, which was fully catered, so there was no need to leave. I didn't return to the main hotel area until around 5 in the afternoon. I came to a stop as soon as I stepped back into the hotel lobby. The first thing I saw was that same guy, standing in the exact same spot as 7 or so hours ago, despite probable shift changes. But this time, he was now standing facing the entrance, like he had been watching everyone who came through the door all day. When he saw me, a creepy smirk spread across his face, and he began walking toward me. I tried to ignore him and hurried to the elevator, but while I waited for it to arrive, he caught up to me. As the elevator doors finally opened, he stepped in right behind me. Once he had me cornered, he tried to start small talk. He asked how my day was. When I gave a brief response, he asked if I was traveling alone. I told him about the conference. Then I added that my co-workers were staying in the hotel too. Unfortunately, this didn't seem to bother him. He just stood there silently, staring blankly at me, with a creepy smile on his face. Finally, the elevator doors opened, and I stepped out. As expected, he stepped out of the elevator too. I figured he might try to follow me to my room, so I had pressed the button for the floor above mine instead. I basically ran to the nearest stairwell, went down a floor, and quickly entered my actual room. He couldn't keep up with me, and luckily, he didn't see me go inside, so I figured I was in the clear. I received a work call that ran way longer than expected. During the conference that day, I had won a bottle of wine at an event, and since it had warmed up over time, I stepped out to grab a bucket of ice so it could chill while I took a shower. At first, I didn't see anyone in the hallway, so I relaxed a little. I messed with the ice machine for a minute, but it wouldn't work, so I had to go up a floor to find one that did. While I was upstairs, after getting the ice from the machine, I turned around and found him standing right behind me. This time, he was out of his uniform, just wearing a robe with the embroidered hotel insignia on it. I was completely dumbfounded that he was able to sneak up on me. He was grinning victoriously too, which just made me sick. He asked me why I ran earlier, telling me that I already knew him, questioning me if I forgot. He started to undo the robe tie, and I immediately knew what he was about to do. No way I was going to let him flash me. Before he could go any further, I threw the entire bucket of ice in his face and broke into a full sprint down the hallway. I ran down the stairs, rushed to my room, and slammed the door shut, locking every lock I could, From the sounds of it, he was chasing after me a few seconds behind, probably running with everything hanging out, for everyone to see. I saw the shadow of his feet under the door and noticed when the light from the hallway stopped coming through the peephole. I could hear him muttering something under his breath. I knew he would have stood there waiting for me all night if he had the chance. I resisted the urge to confront him and instead called the front desk to report what was happening. A few minutes later, the nighttime desk employee came up to the hallway, but the man was already gone. When they checked the hotel security footage, they couldn't identify him as staff. Later, they found that a uniform had gone missing from the staff storage room. He was likely a guest, though they couldn't confirm it, and they said they would keep an eye out for him. Sitting alone in my locked hotel room, I kept replaying what he had said to me at the ice machine earlier, about knowing him. At the time, I had no idea what he was going on about, but after everything that happened, it finally clicked. On the drive up, I had stopped at a gas station, getting gas before running inside to grab a snack and use the restroom. As I walked out of the bathroom area, I barely noticed the guy leaning against the wall near the men's room. Just some random person, or so I thought. But as I passed him, something made me glance at the reflection in the door leading back to the main part of the gas station. First thing I noticed was that he had his hand inside his pants. I never got a clear look at his face. I just rushed back to my car, locked the doors, and got out of there as fast as I could. At the time, I figured it was just some disgusting creep I'd never see again. But now I know, it was him. Living in Hawaii meant I had never experienced a real winter before. After binge-watching Yellowstone and seeing those sweeping shots of Montana's wilderness, I knew I had to experience it firsthand. The show's stunning mountain scenery and vast landscapes were completely different from my tropical home. I decided to treat myself to a getaway vacation somewhere cold, wanting to see the kind of winter weather everyone talked about, in a place I had only seen on TV. After looking around online, I found a rustic cabin rental near Yellowstone National Park in Montana through Booking.com. The options in my price range were limited, but I managed to find one that seemed decent enough. Within a week, I was on a flight heading to Montana. The airport was small and getting my rental car was quick. The drive to the cabin wasn't as simple. The roads were icy and visibility was poor. After 3 hours of careful driving, I reached the small town I'd be staying in. My first impression wasn't great. Scattered cabins barely visible through dense snow-covered pines lined the road. The streetlights barely lit up the snowy road, and you could just make out some mountains in the distance. It looked abandoned and silent, nothing like the romantic version I'd seen on TV. It felt more like something from a winter horror movie. I knew it would probably look different during the day, but for now, this was all I had to go on. I found the cabin without much trouble, following the snow-covered road to an area where my rental sat, among a few other cabins, well spaced out with dense trees between them. I parked my rental car and carried my bags to the front door, struggling a bit, in the deep snow. The temperature was well below anything I'd experienced before, and my thin jacket wasn't doing much to help. The cabin was rustic but cozy, with thick wooden doors and a fireplace. The whole place was around 400 square feet, but the setup was actually pretty nice. I set my things down in the bedroom and went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea and take a moment to unwind before bed. Then I headed to the living room to get a fire going and warm myself up. While I was sitting by the fireplace trying to get feeling back in my fingers, I heard a car approaching on the snow-covered road. Through the window, I saw headlights slowly moving closer. The car parked just beyond my view, and the headlights flickered briefly before going dark. No one got out. After a moment, I just walked off and returned to the kitchen, since it wasn't really my concern, and I didn't want them to catch me staring. Still, the quiet seemed odd. I refilled my tea in the kitchen before returning to the living room and sitting by the fire, pulling out my phone to respond to some messages and I let my family know that I had made it there safe. I stayed there for about 20 minutes before I decided it was time to head to the bedroom and prepare to sleep. I was unpacking some things and was getting ready for bed when I heard car doors open and close outside. The sound was muffled by the fresh snow, making the footsteps that followed seem eerily slow and quiet. The footsteps stopped suddenly, right on the porch. It seemed like someone was just standing there in the cold. I tried to ignore it and eventually got into bed. Sleep didn't come easy with the howling wind outside and the unsettling quiet in between. The harsh Montana winter was nothing like the gentle Hawaiian nights I was used to. From what I recall, I dozed off after about 20 minutes and didn't hear anything else during that time. I woke up sometime later feeling deeply uncomfortable. Everything was quiet except for the howling wind outside. I sat up and looked around the dark room, trying to figure out what had woken me. That's when I noticed the uncovered window. There was a hooded figure standing outside, staring directly at me. My heart stopped. After a moment, the figure moved away from the window. There were no footsteps, no sound of them leaving. The fresh snow muffled everything, making it impossible to tell where they went. They were still out there somewhere. I quickly got up to get dressed, but then I heard something from outside my bedroom door. Heavy footsteps moved away from the door and ran down the hallway. I heard the footsteps go from inside the house to the snow outside. That's when I heard two voices whispering, one male, one female. Their voices were close, probably right outside my bedroom. I couldn't make out most of what they were saying, but their hurried whispers mentioned something about me being the wrong person, but I wasn't sure. Then a car started and drove off. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do, so I just stood there, frozen, listening to make sure they were really gone. After a while, I carefully opened the bedroom door. I found the front door wide open, letting in the bitter cold night air. Fresh tire tracks led away from the cabin, leaving clear marks in the snow. In the morning, I found something even more disturbing. There were two sets of footprints in the snow. Both sets led from the woods to the cabin. These weren't fresh, they looked kinda old. They'd been partially filled in by earlier snowfall. Looked like whoever they were, they had been watching the cabin for days, possibly stalking the previous guests before I even arrived. But no way of knowing for sure. I did what I could, and I reported everything to the local police station, but nothing ever came of it. Who they were, what they wanted, and why they broke in, I didn't stick around to find out. I canceled my booking right away, moved out, and found a hotel to stay in. It was outside my price range, but after that experience, I didn't care. Apart from that incident, Montana was every bit as beautiful as it was portrayed on Yellowstone. Winters were always my favorite when I was growing up, because my mom, my younger siblings, and I spent a few weeks at my uncle's lodge in Colorado. My uncle, Mum's older brother, had never married, and he loved having us there. He'd take us skiing, ice fishing, and hiking through the snow-covered pines. From ages 7 to 12, those trips were some of my best memories. Then, when I was 13, my uncle passed away suddenly from cancer, and my mom was left the lodge. We stopped going as often. The place sat mostly empty for years. Life got busy, and the lodge became a distant thought. But a couple of winters back, my mom suggested one last trip before deciding whether to sell it. I was 17, and my younger siblings, Robert, Terry, and Vera, were excited. My mom's new boyfriend, John, was coming along too. It was his first trip with us, and he wasn't too keen on being stuck in the middle of nowhere. The drive up was rough. The roads were icy, and by the time we arrived, it was nearly dark. When we stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the warmth. Not the kind from a heater, but something faint, like a fire had been burning earlier. There was also this foul smell that at the time we couldn't place, as it was so faint. The lodge should have been freezing. The caretaker hadn't been there in months. John walked through the rooms, frowning. He checked the loft and ground floor, but hadn't bothered with the basement, figuring it was just empty, and according to Mom, the door tended to stick in the cold, making it a hassle to get open. He pointed at the fireplace and said the ashes looked fresh. My mom brushed it off, saying maybe the caretaker had stopped by unexpectedly, but something felt weird. A small draft came from a window, and the back door latch was a little loose. It looked closed, but when I checked, it wiggled slightly. That night, after we settled in, I woke up to a noise in the kitchen. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffling sound, kind of like someone moving around. I figured it was one of my younger siblings getting water. In the morning, I asked them about it at breakfast. Robert and Terry both shook their heads, saying they hadn't left the loft. Vera was still groggy, barely paying attention, but she also shook her head, saying it wasn't her. John said he thought he heard something too, but assumed it was just one of us kids. We went on with our day. Mom and John wanted to do some ice fishing, and Robert and Terry were eager to try skiing. Vera stayed behind by the fireplace, saying she wasn't feeling great. The rest of us bundled up and headed outside. About an hour later, we heard someone yelling. We turned and saw Vera running toward us. She looked scared and was breathless, hyperventilating as she rushed. We struggled on our skis to meet her part way, and she barely got the words out. Someone was inside. A man. Robert, Terry, and I all exchanged a quick glance, ditched our skis, and we ran toward the lodge. As we got closer, I saw the front door was wide open, snow blowing in. As we approached, we felt a mix of fear and determination, ready to protect our younger sister. We stopped just outside and listened. No footsteps inside, no movement. We stepped in cautiously. I grabbed the fireplace poker. The lodge was empty. John and my mom returned soon after, and we checked the place from top to bottom. In the basement, we found signs that someone had been staying there. Some old blankets, a few empty food cans, and a bucket that smelled like a makeshift toilet shoved in one corner. That explained the faint foul smell from earlier. Whoever it was had made themselves comfortable. Vera, still shaken, told us she had been sitting near the fire coughing when she heard a noise. She thought it was one of us at first, until she saw the man. She said he had long unkempt hair, a scruffy beard, and worn-out clothes. He was in the kitchen, going through the cabinets. He must have heard her cough, glanced at her, not startled but watching, as if deciding what to do next. Then, without a word to Vera, he ran for the front door. We called the police. When they arrived, they weren't completely surprised. They said over the years, lots of part-time occupied cabins in the area had reported similar break-ins. No damage, just signs of someone sneaking in and staying for a while. Probably drifters or someone trying to survive the winter. A few months later, my mom sold the lodge. We never went back.